Super. So, hi guys, thanks for joining us. Good to see you here. Well, we've got the book on the screen here, and we're very lucky to have the author with us because it was written by Levent. So, yeah, we're going to talk about respect today. Levent, you said to me once, if you ask everybody if they're respectful, they all say yes. Where did that come from, mate? What were you doing?
Yes, that's interesting. Especially in continuous improvement world, everybody is talking about respect for people. That is common sense and straightforward. I never saw anybody who is saying I am disrespectful to people. Everybody says all the leaders are saying they are respectful. But when it comes to actions in the workplace, their actions are different. So we need to stop and think about which is respectful, which is not. That was an interesting point. So as again, everybody is talking about respect, and I think everybody genuinely appreciates the importance of respect over people at workplace. So I thought we should define what respect is according to what's happening in the workplace. So a typical manager makes about more than 100 actions every day, let's say, and each of them are either respectful or not respectful. I mean, we need to discuss what is respectful, what is not, to come to a common understanding so that we can form a common belief, which can then be the value or principle for the organization that everybody can follow. Yeah. It's not as easy as it is seen. That's why I decided to write this book.
No, it's definitely not as easy. Otherwise, we'd all be getting it right, and we're certainly not. Yeah, it's something that's occurred to me, more and more in the last few years, is the amount that standardization is so important, and we standardize so much of what we do in business, but we don't standardize definitions of things like respect that determine our conduct. And then everybody says, yeah, I'm respectful. And then they all act differently, and sometimes not very respectfully, so, by my judgment, of course. But no, great, thanks, mate. It's really interesting stuff, isn't it? It's I mean, a lot about this interpretation. I mean, it's usually so surface level, isn't it? We normally say be fair, communicate better. Do you want to say anything about that while I keep letting people in that are turning up? Just bear with me.
Okay. Some organizations even define respect as one of their values. And if you ask them what is respectful, I saw that many people define respect about being nice to people. But when you stop and think about it, it's not always being nice to people. Sometimes you need to stop people doing what they are doing, or you need to punish them if you really value them. So respect is not about being nice to people. Respect is about understanding their value and acknowledging that value.
Yeah, you really touch on a key point that comes up over and over again for me in the conversations I have about, you mentioned punishment. Now, we know that command and control, fear-based control, doesn't lead to good cultures. That's pretty well established these days. But also when it comes to parenting, when are you doing what's right for the other person, so that's being respectful to them? And this gets for me straight into the realms of Hito Zakuri and trying to build people. The way I've come to terms with the conflict is that if you are consciously choosing to do something that is going to benefit the other person, if that looks like imposed control, but it's for their own good, and you're doing it from a calm, controlled, considered perspective, then it's a good thing. If you're doing it because you can't regulate your own emotional response and you're doing it from a position of anger and frustration, and you're taking it out on the other person, then it's not a good thing to punish. So I think it's really, we have to be so careful with our language to be very clear on what we're saying. And so, doing what is restrictive of other people and giving them boundaries to work in, which can look like punishment, is sometimes a respectful thing to do. So yeah, brilliant, mate. I love it. Let's crack on.
The only thing you can be sure is that when you talk about respect, you can be sure that the others understand it differently.
Yes, absolutely. There's not many people get into that level of conversation about how can we be respectful, even if it looks like we're having a negative or causing a negative emotional response in another person, which, I guess in broad terms, we don't want to make people feel bad, but if it's for their own good, there's a deeper conversation to be had. So yeah, very interesting. But look, we're in this situation, right? We've got this ambiguity around the word respect. You've written a brilliant book on it, which is hundreds of pages long, because there's so much to it. But it also sits underneath these, we've done some meta-analysis on failure rates of change programs. 70% failure rate is pretty well backed up by a lot of data across the last 20 years. So we can say that, ERP approaches, introductions, IT programs, lean, it's not just lean, it's everything, right? We get our projects and programs not as effective as they can be if this is missing. So it's really important, isn't it? What you're TPS, you come from Toyota for 16 years. There's no one better to talk about this than you, as far as I'm concerned. Well, how would you put this part of this puzzle across to people, mate?
Yeah, it looks like a puzzle, but it is not that complicated. In fact, one day I remember a Japanese manager told me while I was working there, I asked him, it's so complicated, you have so many systems. What if one works, the other does not? He said, no, it's not like this. If you can do 5S properly, you can do anything, he said. If you think about it, that's right, because to do 5S requires a common belief, a shared belief among everybody. They need to take the ownership of it, and they need to protect it to make it sustainable. Otherwise, we cannot talk about standards and continuous improvement, right?
Yeah.
It is the same here. If you really have respect in your organization, I cannot imagine why there will be failures. Because a respectful organization can do all other, can implement all other values or principles properly, I think.
Yeah, because of the way it makes people react to you, isn't it? It's about that signal you're sending, being respectful, and the way that triggers the brain in response. I love the point about 5S, because I often ask people to, once we've taught them a bit about brain function, to explain back to me why 5S or 4S, as it is in Toyota, is an act of respect. And when you start to recognize that, if again, going back to Japanese thinking and belief systems that sit behind all this, if you're taking somebody away from their family for 8 hours a day to contract them to work for you, then you need to be able to give them what they need, when they need it, where they need it, to optimize and maximize their capacity to contribute to the business that's giving them their livelihood and contributing to their community and society. So it's respectful to execute 5S. And yet we've interpreted it as, a way to beat people up and put them under audits to see if they've got a clean desk. We've completely missed the point around respect and that being an act of respect. So it's fascinating. You start getting into this and it opens up so many different channels and makes us think so much more deeply. But let's talk about that brain. I just mentioned brain stuff. And we're not going to go into it too deeply today. We want to focus on another part of this presentation in a couple of slides' time. But what's going on if you think about this? I just mentioned inbound sensory stimulus. I use some funny language talking about brain function, but if you think that our brain is processing about 11 million bits of sensory data per second, right? So all of the visual processing and the audio processing through the body that the brain has to do is about 11 million bits per second, and we only become conscious of about 50 to 60 bits of that sensory data per second. So what we actually end up thinking about the world is an outcome of that massive amount of processing going on at a subconscious level. And so if any of the signals coming from the other person, the peer, the boss, the market, whatever else it might be, is anything other than respectful, which means we're going to trigger, ideally, the positive responses or negative ones when we need to, as just discussed. But inevitably, if it's a bad sensory stimulus that triggers our brain not to be able to predict accurately going ahead, then that's when we get this threat-based response through the HPA axis and everything else cuts in. And when that happens, and that's the science, a little bit of the science behind it. When it happens, these are the outcomes. If we determine threat, and that comes from non-respectful behaviors, then it starts shutting down our capacity to learn because the glucose energy goes to different parts of the brain. When we talk about fear, we're talking about elevated cortisol levels and adrenaline levels, so that narrows our attention because it also shifts the brain chemistry. You know, if we're trying to work with too much ambiguity, if we can't be certain about things, going back to this prediction era, that's going to trigger our defensive responses, our protection. And the key to that is that respect reduces all of these things, right? So we can look at it neurologically, but like Levent said, we don't have to make it too complicated. It can be quite simple. So, you know, if we flip that, then the corollary applies. If we understand respect as a neurological condition, and we are trying to do my favorite phrase, I'm going to get it in again, you know, create the conditions in which brains perform at their best. That is our outcome objective as leaders, right? When we do that, people become more open to their errors, so they look to improve. That's, you know, the self-improvement definition of Kaizen. We become more open to feedback because it's not seen as an attack. We're open to experiment, and we're open to sort of be more responsible and take ownership for what's going on around us. So, you know, the whole thing starts to make so much sense as soon as you look at it through the neuroscience lens, and it really demands, you know, how we conduct ourselves and take responsibility for that. So, I mean, Levent, a lot of talking for me there. Jump back in, mate. How do we address some of these key issues in the market? We frame the way we help businesses in terms of improving alignment, reducing resistance, and
yeah. There is a saying: if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you look from respect perspective, in fact, everything is easy, not so complicated. Let's take Toyota case. Toyota just applies principle-based practice, and Toyota has 5 very, very simple principles. No, not coming to that.
Okay. Good. Sorry.
5 principles are: first, respect, then teamwork, challenge, Kaizen, and it goes like this. But let's again stop and think about them. If you respect people, you respect who they are, how their brain is operating. You respect their identity and their nature. What is their nature? What is our nature as human? We want to be belonging to a group, right? We cannot be happy living in the jungle, so we need to connect with other people, and we need other people to appreciate us, to give us a value. Otherwise, we cannot find a place in community, right? Which is dreadful for people. And we want to improve continuously. If you read, before the neuroscience has developed, if you read philosophers that went in existentialism, for example, human, of course, these are all based on observations and self-reports, not like neuroscience testable explanations, but we set targets, and we strive to reach those targets. But when we get close to those targets, these targets lose value. Just before, when we arrive them, their value gets to 0, and we have to set new targets and get new motivation to move to these targets. This is how human brain works, which is called Kaizen. So all these principles at Toyota, respect, teamwork, challenge, and Kaizen, are in fact explaining how human brain works. And why Toyota is successful is it is now explained by neuroscience, because we see that brains are operating their best under these conditions, under these environments. So what happens when there is no respect to this human nature? That human wants to develop himself, human wants to set his targets, human wants to create alternative options, alternative ways to reach their targets, and human is capable to choose one of them. If you block them doing one of these, human will not be happy. So respect is about acknowledging that these are basic human needs. And if you block these needs, this is what's happening. Alignment, as you see in the slide, you get misalignment. They start not rowing in the same direction with you. They start resisting the change because they see it as a threat, and they are disengaged. The disengagement level is horrible. It is 79% according to Gallup. some of you I know find this value too big, but if you run the satisfaction surveys by yourself and if you ask biased questions to people, you will get about 70-80% of satisfaction. But if you ask a really probing question, this is what's happening. It is 79% of disengagement around the world. Anyway, let's don't consume the entire time with this light.
No, you're right though, mate. It's good. It's good point. Is I think there's a key point I'm going to take out of everything you just said is that we've had some subjective language, and in some cultures, that subjective language has managed to strike on the right solutions. Now everybody can understand what works and what doesn't work for people and brains because we've got neuroscience, and it's just a fantastic time to be alive, to be able to reframe what we've seen before. I mean, and this is a great example. I jumped to it a bit too soon then because you mentioned principle-based practice, but this is where it all comes together for me. We've been looking at the world from a logical perspective for the last 40 plus years, doing the PDCA, PDSA, if you're American, prefer that acronym. But we omit respect in the ways we've just explained it today, and we need to get this balance right. And like you said, this improvement in language that's now available because of neuroscience just completely and utterly changes the playing field. I mean, Levent, this is a good slide to spend a few more minutes on before we run out of time. How did Toyota do it? You mentioned principle-based practice. What with these two circles, overlapping circles, a lot of people don't know where they come from. What's this all about? What are we seeing?
So if you are talking about TPS, lean, continuous improvement, etc., you must be familiar with that famous Toyota house with just-in-time Jidoka as pillars, etc., etc. But what you don't see at this house is these two circles, continuous improvement and respect for people. These are the basic principles, founding principles behind Toyota's success. What is copied as lean in the Western world is the left side, continuous improvement, which is continuous problem solving with PDCA. Very, very easy to understand and very effective. But the problem is people don't get the ownership of it. People don't own it. They don't feel responsible to make it sustainable. Why? Because respect for people is missing. When the Toyota production system is copied as PDCA or lean, of course, people couldn't see the relationships behind it and respect for people. That was missing the piece which couldn't be copied. And so how can you develop a culture, high-performance culture like Toyota? You can use the methods that Toyota use, which is principle-based practice. As I said, you can define what respect is. You can discuss about it. You can reach a consensus and commitment about it. And then everybody starts to behave according to it. So once you believe the same thing, your actions will be similar. That means you are pulling in the same direction and problem is solved. But it is nearly impossible to do in a Western company because you need a lot of senseis or people who can teach the entire organization in a short time. It is possible, but nearly impossible. I tried to do it. I can explain you later. It takes a lot of time. So it's not practical for Westerners. Instead, we are very lucky that neuroscience has recent advances that makes it very easy to understand what's going on in the brain when people are not respected. So what we have developed is BTFA online course. And in this course, we show how brain works. Our brain works simply according to this mechanism: believe, think, feel, act. We feel, and we act accordingly. We don't act according to our rational thinking most of the time. And we show leaders what happens in the other brain if they act disrespectfully. When they see it under the light of neuroscience, there's no other way that their beliefs should shift. That's what we can call awareness. So after the course, during the course, in 5 weeks, we have 6 times iterations and their reflections about what they learned and how they can apply it. So at the end of these 6 weeks, it becomes a skill that they can use at work. For us, this program is the shortest and most effective way to inject respect as a belief in an organization.
Yeah, it's like multi-point injection, isn't it? I think we used to use that analogy a lot. And if anybody knows anything about injection molding, you'll know that, you know, there was a lot less stress in the component and a lot less power required to fill the cavity in an injection molding tool when Toyota developed multi-point injection. And it's the same sort of thing at NUMMI, which, if everybody's heard of it, it was the Toyota experiment in America to see if they could set up a successful plant outside of Toyota back in the late 80s, I think it was. And they put, like Levent said, lots of senseis across from Japan and lots of time into developing people. We just haven't got that luxury in business today. So this is the best way to get that multi-point injection and get everybody on the same page about what works and what doesn't work for people and brains, which then leads to, you know, better problem solving, collaboration, and all those organizational traits we're looking for in business. So I think we're coming up on time here. We're 1 minute over, so I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly because we do like to try and stick to our 20 minutes when we can. Hopefully that's been entertaining and insightful for you guys on the call. Thanks for joining us. A few questions that have come up around this subject is, does this work in high pressure environments? Absolutely it does. We've been working with organizations across the world and we've got consistent results everywhere we've gone. How long does belief and safety take to shift? We get 95% of everybody that ever attends BTFA within the 5-week period comes out with a very different view of the world and starts acting very differently as a byproduct of that. And can frontline leaders be trained? Absolutely. We're working with night shift workers. We're working with all sorts of different people in different factories all around the world. So final slide is that, you know, respect for people, it's been framed as a value, a belief, a principle. All of these words are ambiguous. What happens when we move to the middle and we consider it as a neurological condition for improvement, you know, and return to our original question, are you respectful? If we ask that, once everybody understands the neuroscience side of it, they can answer more accurately and they know what they've got to do to actually send those signals to the other brain that qualifies as being respectful. Much more clearly, and therefore conduct starts to become more consistent across leaders, across functions, across business divisions, and we see culture change, and it's working everywhere we go. So if that hopefully makes sense, Levent, feel free to throw a last word in if you want to, but if you're happy when we're done and that makes sense, you know, do give us a shout if you want to know more, and we'll continue the conversation. So brilliant. Thanks, mate. Any final words?
Thank you very much for attending our webinar, and we hope to see you next time. If you have any questions, please contact us anytime.
Brilliant. And we've still got to continuously improve because we're at 23 minutes now instead of 20 minutes. So we've got to go away and think about our presentations again. Brilliant. Cheers all. Great to see you and some familiar names on there. Lovely. Speak to you all soon. Cheers, guys. Bye.